Hi guys, if you are currently in New Zealand and are looking for work, you will know that the job market is in no way healthy. In fact, it's far from it. The unemployment rate has risen from 4.8% in the September 2024 quarter to 5.1% in the December 2024 quarter. Now, as you can see, this data is extremely lagged, as we are nearly at the end of April 2025 now. But if the number of newspaper articles about job losses lately are true, then this unemployment figure will probably grow for the March 2025 quarter. Now, this chart from StatsNZ, with a link in the description, shows a sharp downturn in the employment rate. You will notice that this employment rate was actually going down in 2019 because the world economy was starting to deteriorate even then. But COVID came and the central bank saw a way to use money printing to cover up this weakness. Now, this did work temporarily. But now, without more fake stimulus, the real weakness is about to be exposed and in a big way. If you've been watching any of my other videos, you will have seen the weakness showing up in the housing market. The fake, pumped-up fire economy, which refers to finance, insurance and real estate sectors, have been the saviour of the New Zealand economy for many years since the GFC. The central banks worked out that printing money inflated assets, and this artificially created jobs and momentum within these sectors. They didn't care that this greatly increased inequality and doomed future generations. That was not their problem. In fact, the crazy house price rises knock-on effects show up in this employment chart. Just look at the number of females who have had to join the job market and how it kept on increasing and how it's getting closer and closer to the number of males employed. Now, the main reason for this is the extra household income needed to afford an overinflated New Zealand mortgage. Obviously, this puts more financial pressure on people and puts too much pressure on young couples, meaning less children will be born. This is why New Zealand's fertility rate is crashing. We know it, and the government knows it, but they don't care. And then this chart shows the unemployment rate. And once again, you can see a large rise occurring, which was inevitable when all the fake sugar hit from COVID-induced stimulus wore off. Mark my words, the government is worried about this. They're not so worried about Kiwis losing their jobs and their lives being ruined. No, they're more concerned about what effect it's going to have on their housing Ponzi, which so many MPs are so heavily invested in. And they are worried what the housing lobby, their main backers, are going to say when house prices start crashing even further. It's going to be very interesting to see the March quarter unemployment results, that's for certain. So if unemployment is not going down, then how on earth can the government justify a sudden large intake in net migration that will add more pressure to an already struggling job market? This will obviously put more downward pressure on wages. In fact, the only thing that this will help is landlords and unscrupulous employers, as it will help landlords fill their expensive dilapidated weatherboard shacks and allow employers to pay below market rates. It will also put a floor on the house prices, because when landlords can fill their drafty, dilapidated shacks, they are less likely to put their properties for sale, which would have inevitably put more downward pressure on a housing market that's currently hanging on for dear life. New Zealand's population has been blown out of all proportions over the last few years in an attempt to pump the housing Ponzi, and it did work for them. Lots of property investor MPs got very rich, didn't they, Mr. Luxon? Since the 2000s, house prices have been going to the moon. In 2001, New Zealand's population was 3.88 million people. Now, just the North Island of New Zealand has more than 4 million people. The fertility rate in New Zealand is less than 1.6 births per woman. And obviously, this has to be over 2 to keep the population just level, meaning that the population explosion is increasingly caused by immigration. In fact, if you look here, StatsNZ has a population clock. I'll put a link to it in the description. You can see New Zealand's population is now 5.333 million. Now, this is rising so fast it's scary, especially when the governments do not seem to understand that as a population grows, so should the services and infrastructure of that country. It's crazy when you see that there is only one New Zealand birth every 8 minutes and 44 seconds, and one net migration every 10 minutes and 15 seconds. Now, just imagine how much house prices would be crashing without the immigration input. This one data point alone shows how desperate the New Zealand government is to keep the New Zealand housing Ponzi flame burning. So who actually voted for this change? Or was it hidden somewhere in the Treaty of Waitangi in some small print that only certain people know about? There's one thing for certain though at this point, New Zealand is going to look like a very different place in a generation or two And if this is happening just to keep an overinflated Ponzi on life support, to save the vast wealth of the few, then that is not a good enough reason. If you can have a referendum costing millions and millions of dollars about a silly little flag design, then you can have a referendum about the priorities moving forward of everyone in New Zealand and not just the rich asset holders. Some people will say, oh, the election's the referendum, but it's not. When both major parties are so heavily invested in property, with the biggest, most obviously corrupt conflict of interest known in the Western world, then this is far from a referendum. Unfortunately, the minor parties are no better. The New Zealand political class is so far removed from reality that I swear they must have been either brainwashed or have been paid off handsomely to become so disaffected by the suffering of others. They have absolutely no regard for the poorest or most vulnerable in society. None of them. So, to give you an understanding of just how desperate each of the petrified governments are about saving the housing Ponzi, look no further than the actions of this lady. Remember when she got into power and her first move was to ban foreign investors? Everyone thought, what a great idea. That may finally slow down these insidious house price increases. Then a couple of years later, she used COVID as an excuse to effectively completely negate that policy and more by coming up with a special one-time visa in 2021, where she gave residency to at least 200,000 people. But with dependencies, this number will be much, much higher. Now, I tried to find the exact figure, but was unable to, unfortunately. It's like they don't want people to know. This decision completely wiped out any positives from the foreign buyer ban, and for many years to come. What an absolute fraud. Once again, Jacinda gaslit everyone that she was trying to stop foreign buyers, but to get around the issue, she made foreign people new Kiwis so they can buy but are no longer classed as foreign buyers, even though they are foreign buyers in reality. You couldn't make up how cynical these people are. You really couldn't. Anything to save the Ponzi. Now just look at what Luxon did as soon as he took power. His first mission was to give billions of dollars in tax breaks to landlords. So, in conclusion, guys, if jobs are getting harder to find and more people are being allowed into the country to prop up the Ponzi, then without a shadow of a doubt, things are going to get worse for the poorest and the youngest in society. Inflation has already started picking up again. And guess what's driving it? Yes, you guessed it, rent prices. The very thing that would be going down if they stopped trying to cram in as many people as possible into the country. Inflation as a whole affects the poorest in society the most. It always has. So once again, government policies are being created to punish the poorest and youngest in society. This time, though, the government has a big problem. If inflation does kick back up, then it will put pressure on the RBNZ to stop cutting rates, the only thing besides mass immigration that could possibly reignite the Ponzi in any meaningful way. This, added to unemployment, would mean less people able or willing to pay the crazy elevated prices that are out there in the already saturated housing Ponzi market. The government are going to find it harder and harder to make themselves richer using the age-old housing Ponzi capital gain scam without causing absolute carnage to the rest of the New Zealand population. One thing that I have found interesting when looking through this data on the New Zealand job market is the sector that is growing and not getting smaller. Now, this sector is the public sector, the very sector that this government promised to slash. Now, why would they be doing that, do you think? Why would they be actually increasing a sector that they said they were going to cut? Could it be to fudge the numbers, do you think? To make it look like the economy is not doing as bad as it is? Personally, I expect this is so. Now let's look at the number of job ads on Seek by region. Now there are some enormous drops in some areas, and this is going to put serious pressure on the economy and the Ponzi. Simply importing lots of new people into this current situation is not a good idea. But you cannot tell these clowns or the other clowns. They are all intent on destroying the most beautiful country in the world in a vain attempt to rekindle the overinflated Ponzi. So for any Kiwis watching this who wants to see how cruel a so-called civilized Western government can get to the weakest in its society just to save the housing Ponzi, take a look at this video that's just popped up on the screen. It's getting so bad in Australia that UNICEF should consider stepping in. Youth homelessness is getting out of control as millionaire investors rake in billions. Anyhow guys, hope you all had a good Easter and somehow managed to not overdose on chocolate like myself. And I will see you on the next one. Cheers for that.